Hi folks, morning. Looking pretty terrible because I've not long been up, plus I'm not feeling particularly great. And as soon as I started recording this, the washing machine's gone. Um, just turned on, not packed it in. Anyway, apologies if you can hear the noise in the background. Continuing on with this utter farce, this is the Richard Lehman review series with a nice mug of green tea. Anyway, we're on to book 12 now in this review series, and for book number 12, it's getting more and more difficult, I tell you, because the quality of the books, I think, really ramps up. But for book number 12, I've chosen his 1989 book, Funland. It was a close call between this and, to be honest, the next two books, from books 10, 11 and 12, are all books that I really enjoy, and they're all quite closely knitted together. And I suppose on any given day, this could have been 11 or 10, but just today it happens to be 12. Funland was the first Lehman novel to exceed 500 pages. This was his first big book. And Lehman was quite unique in that he had this rule with these big books of having, and this is I discovered the other horror channel that I've mentioned, that he had a habit of making his endings for his big books exactly 100 pages long. And that's something I'll get into in a little bit. Yeah, Funland, it's also a book that the front cover here, I'm not sure if this was the first. I don't think this was the very first book he did that the cover wasn't by Steve Crisp, but it looks like Steve Crisp's work, basically. But Funland was one of the earliest, other than the Beast House series, which I still haven't got to yet, other than the novella. Funland was one of the first Lehman books I ever read, and it's quite a complex book by Lehman standards. It has a large cast of characters. There's quite a few people in this, and there's quite a lot going on. And what you've really got is a group of, I'd call them kids, but they're like old teenagers, some of them maybe early 20s, who decide to take the law into their own hands because they're convinced that there's a homeless population problem where they live, where they believe that the local tramps, are not just vagrants but murderers. They're kidnapping people, they're raping people, they're even murdering people. And these, for want of a better word, kids decide they want to sort of fight back and start attacking the tramps and beating them up, and then finding out where they're taking these bodies and what's really going on in this sort of beachside place that they live on. And it transpires, obviously, that there's something darker going on and that it's not just the tramps they've got to worry about. The first 400 odd pages of this story, which is, the bulk of the story, are actually really, really good. Quite tense, quite interesting, and again, unusually for Lehman, I think he does a decent job of fleshing out quite a large cast of characters. They all feel identifiable, they're all unique, they all have their own personalities. They're all interesting. Some of them go on quite interesting character arcs. There's one in particular who starts off quite good-willing, or at least gives the perception of being good-willing, and then turns more than vigilante, becomes quite an unpleasant character. There's I'm pretty sure this is the one where the main ringleader. I mean, it's weird with Lehman. I always say that he doesn't understand women, in that, from a sexual point of view, he always sees women as either victims of assault or nymphomaniacs. In the same way that he doesn't understand, I don't think he understands gay or bisexual people, because anybody who is gay or bisexual in his books, if you look at, say, Marta from Blood Rides, or the guy from Night in the Lonesome October, they're always just free and willing to have promiscuous sex with anybody and anyone that they meet, almost like they're raving nymphomaniacs, But he did, the majority of Lehman's best characters are female. There's two in this book. I think the main ringleader of this group is called Tanya, and there's another girl later on called Robin, and I'm pretty sure her name was Robin, and they're fantastic characters. They're really likeable. radically different, but just great characters. And it's odd that, you know, the actual sexual aspect Layman never understood or got right, but the actual way of writing characters, especially females that are likable, he did really well. So don't know what's going on there, but very weird. Yeah, the story itself's got a lot of action to it, and it's a mystery as to what's going on. Now, I mentioned about the last 100 pages, the actual way in which you'd finish these novels off. Once they find out who the real villain of the piece is, and they descend into his lair, I kind of feel like it's a bit long-winded, and it kind of gets a bit silly towards the end. There's a bit, I mean, it's pretty obvious who the main villain is, but I won't give it away just in case you don't know. But the main villain character is such a sort of weedy villain. I'm like, my biggest question for any of this is why is any of these characters, these villainous characters, doing what this character says? Because they seem to be quite a easily beatable character. You know, they're a very sort of frail, weedy individual. But they just so happen to have swathes of things willing to do their every whim. In particular, a bit in which they ride on the back of this gigantic spider, which, I don't know, like I say, most of Layman's stuff, he does have supernatural and monstrous elements. And my top 10 has got a lot of that stuff in it. But the majority of books he wrote were about horrible people doing horrible things. He generally stuck to reality and normality. Which is why he often considered what he did more crime than horror in a lot of ways. But the idea of this rather small, frail individual sitting on the back of a giant spider running around corridors, I don't know, just it feels so separate from the rest of the book and kind of weird. I mean, you know, it's escapism, it's fun. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I just thought it was a bit strange. And like I say, that self-imposed rule of 100 pages or so to finish a big 500-page novel, it just sort of, in the same way that Body Rides just sort of dragged, you know, although that was a way worse book. This one kind of, the last 100 pages do kind of drag because it seems to be going through an extended chase and action scene that just doesn't want to end. And that I think is what's dragged this book from my top 10 to number 12. It's not a bad ending at all. It's just, it feels very separate. I'd read, you know, if you're like me and you read a lot and you read quite quickly, I'd read the last 100 pages separate to the rest on its own, because otherwise you might flag a bit. I do think that the resolution's pretty good for once. We've got some good comeuppance against some characters, which I like. But other than that, don't let the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of the sort of like the ending bit, and it's not a bad ending. Again, like I'm saying, just a bit separate to the rest of the story. Throw you away from the fact that I think that the majority of Funland is really, really good. It's got a great atmosphere, you know, nighttime by the sea, by the piers, with a mystery going on, with these kids trying to figure out what's going on and stop it. It's a great adventure, and it showed that Layman could write, because he was really pushing himself here. Up until this book, all his other books had been around the 200 to 300 or so page mark. This was such a big leap for him to try out a 500-page novel, and not pad it out like he did with some of his later books, you know, which were just short stories in disguise. To actually make a 500-page novel feel like a book. And I think he does. I think he does a really good job. And I really, really like this a lot. It's very visual and cinematic. Again, would make for a great film. And it's a thoroughly recommended read. So that's at number 12 from 1989. A book in which I think Layman really pushed it up in terms of what he was capable of. And yeah, he would only go on to even better things. But that's Funland from 1989 at number 12.